I was a science fiction fanatic by the time I was in third grade. Like, I think my parents, they hacked me when I was in first grade. I had this comic book addiction, and they offered me a dime for every real book I read in some reading competition. And comic books cost 25 cents. And I calculated if I read 2.5 books, I could get a comic book. And so I read like 60, 70 books in the summer. And I'd be like reading one a day, and I got into science fiction, and I discovered all the great authors, Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke. Got very interested in that. It led me to a bit of fantasy. I'm the kind of guy who played board games, simulation games. Before we had computers to simulate them on, we had to use, dice, and then I played Dungeons and Dragons, and then it got me into fantasy, and all of that's about imagination. And one of the more famous books is Have Spacesuit Will Travel by Heinlein. And in the book, the hero discovers a spacesuit, fixes it up, it's broken, barking at the sky, a spaceship lands, he gets picked up, he gallivants across the universe, saves humanity from the bug-eyed monsters, comes back. And as his reward, he gets a full tuition scholarship to MIT. And I guess it's stuck in my mind, that if you're the upwardly mobile alpha male, tech forward thinker, maybe you want to go to MIT. So I went to MIT to study spaceship design, and I was going to be an astronaut and a spaceship designer. And that brought me in touch with, some just extraordinary individuals, extraordinary professors, extraordinary students. Like, every one of my fraternity brothers was like an Eagle Scout, right? Like, okay, welcome. Like, everybody's a valedictorian, everybody's an Eagle Scout, and they're all brilliant. And what they do for fun, they design space equipment, or they hack the phone system, or the like. And while I was there studying aerospace engineering, I stumbled on the history of science. And the history of science is all about, how did we discover immunology? How did we discover that the Earth, revolves around the sun? Like, how do we get through the Copernican revolution? What's the significance of optics? Why do we stop bleeding people to death? What's the significance of nuclear power? What's the significance of Maxwell's equations, or Newtonian physics, or relativity? And, what did Madame Curie do for us? And how does the society react when you introduce a new technology, whether it's a railroad or an internal combustion engine or an airplane? And so if you look at the history of the world through a technology lens, right, then you start to see things differently. So when I came out of MIT, I had the science fiction background, I had the fantasy background, I had the history of, I always loved history in general. But then the history of science really opened up my eyes to paradigm shifts. I mean, one of the most basic principles of science is the paradigm shift. Dr. Harvey is the guy that discovered that the heart beats blood out through the arteries. It circulates back through the veins. For 10,000 years, no doctor knew what the heart did, and they didn't actually accept circulation. Harvey discovers it, and everybody in the medical profession rejects it. Like, no, we don't believe you. Now, despite the fact they could probably determine this with some experiments, but they don't believe him. And Harvey says, no physician over the age of 40 will ever believe me, ever, right? And then I think Max Planck had a quote. He goes, science advances one death at a time. And Thomas Kuhn says, in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, when you come up with a new paradigm shift, whether it's, the Copernican revolution, right? The universe doesn't revolve around the Earth. Your diseases aren't caused by spirits and demons, but rather by little germs and, in the blood. Or relativity that Einstein put forward, in the paradigm shift of quantum physics, which Einstein rejected, or, quantum uncertainty. Kuhn says these paradigm shifts take place only after the old guard dies, or in a war. There are only two ways you get people to turn the world upside down and see a new idea. They either have to see the old guard die. We're seeing this in crypto right now. I mean, I go around and I'll meet people, and they'll say, yeah, my son told me I needed to talk to you. It's like the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings, the teenagers, they all know. The 50-somethings, 60-somethings, 70-somethings, if they're hearing about it, they're hearing it from their kids. So this is a generational thing up. And I think, so I was fortunate because my advantage was I kind of had the academic grounding. I had the passion. I was always very interested in how do we invent new things with technology. I grew up in a coming of age where, we started, there were 3 channels of broadcast television, and then in rapid succession, you got to where we are today. So, obviously some people are a little bit more, what is the word?
Open-minded?
They've got more of a inclination, an intellectual inclination to appreciate that than others. So I always had a bias toward it. And I just had some really good formative experiences and opportunities in order to feed that inclination.